She died alone in a dark hotel room with $3,500 to her name. Just 40 years earlier, this same woman had thrown a single birthday party that cost over $1 million in today's money. She'd owned mansions on 3 continents. She'd worn Marie Antoinette's pearls. Presidents and princes had competed for her attention. At one point, Barbara Hutton was worth almost $900 million, one of the richest women on earth. But on May 11th, 1979, a hotel maid found her dead in bed at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles. She weighed 75 pounds. She was blind. She was alone. And when they counted up everything she owned, it came to less than the cost of a used car. This is the story of how Barbara Hutton lost everything. Welcome to another educational video on the history of the elites. If this is your first time here, comment below where you're watching from. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our future videos. Not in a single stock market crash, not in one bad business deal, but slowly, relationship by relationship, husband by husband, betrayal by betrayal, until the girl who'd inherited a retail empire ended up with nothing but regrets and an empty bank account. 7 marriages, all of them disasters. $20 million in divorce settlements alone. Another $30 million spent trying to buy the one thing money can't purchase. Real love from people who actually cared about her. The newspapers called her the poor little rich girl. They had no idea how right they were. See, Barbara's tragedy didn't start when her money ran out. It started 72 years earlier, on a spring morning in 1917, meant when a 5-year-old girl climbed the stairs of her family's mansion and found her mother's dead body on the bedroom floor. Everything that happened after, every bad marriage, every fortune hunter, every wasted million, it all traces back to that moment. To a little girl who learned that money couldn't protect you from anything that actually mattered, and then spent her entire life proving it over and over again. So how does someone lose $900 million? How does the Woolworth Heiress, a woman whose grandfather built an empire selling cheap goods to working families, end up broke? And why did every single person she married turn out to be using her? Let's start at the beginning. Not with the money, with the murder that everyone called a suicide, and the 5-year-old girl who never recovered. Barbara Woolworth Hutton was born on November 14th, 1912, into more money than most people can even imagine. Her grandfather was Frank Woolworth. Yes, that Woolworth. The man who invented the 5 and dime store. By 1912, there were over 1,000 Woolworth stores across America. Every spool of thread, every tin cup, every ribbon sold in those stores. A tiny piece of each sale flowed to Barbara's family. When Frank Woolworth died in 1919, 7-year-old Barbara inherited her first fortune, $65 million. In today's money, that's over $1 billion. To a 7-year-old. But it didn't stop there. When her grandmother died in 1924, 12-year-old Barbara got another $26 million. Then there was her mother's estate, another few million. And her father, Franklin Hutton. He was co-founder of the Wall Street firm E.F. Hutton and Company, so he managed all of it, investing it, growing it. By the time Barbara turned 21 and got full control of her money, she had roughly $50 million in cash. Plus properties, plus investments, plus a jewelry collection worth tens of millions more. Financial experts at the time calculated that Barbara was making about $14,000 per day, just from interest. Every single day, whether she was awake or asleep. In today's dollars, that's like making $250,000 per day for doing absolutely nothing. She owned a 50-room mansion in Palm Beach with its own private beach. A London estate so massive it was second in size only to Buckingham Palace within the city limits. A Moorish palace in Morocco. To a Japanese estate she had shipped piece by piece across the Pacific Ocean and rebuilt in Mexico, even though she almost never visited it. She had Rolls Royces in 6 different cities, so she'd never have to ride in the same car twice in 1 week. She had over 300 custom gowns from Paris. She owned pearls that had once belonged to Marie Antoinette. She paid $850,000 for them in 1934. That's $20 million today. For a necklace. The Woolworth building in New York City. Her grandfather had built it in 1913 and paid for the whole thing in cash. It was the tallest building in the world. That's the kind of family she came from. But here's the thing about Barbara's money. It didn't come from knowing how to handle wealth. It didn't come from business smarts or financial education. It came from being born, from having the right grandfather. To Barbara herself, she had no idea how to manage money. No one ever taught her. Why would they? She had so much that it seemed impossible to run out. But beneath this golden surface, something was very, very wrong. Because while Barbara Hutton was inheriting millions, she was also inheriting something else. A family curse of depression, suicide, and toxic relationships that would poison everything the money touched. Barbara Hutton's first clear memory was finding her mother dead. It was May 2nd, 1917. Barbara was 5 years old. Her family was staying at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, the most expensive hotel in America. They had a full suite. Her mother, Edna Woolworth Hutton, was in the bedroom. That morning, little Barbara went looking for her mom, and she wanted to show her a drawing she'd made. She climbed the stairs. She pushed open the bedroom door. Her mother was lying on the carpet. Her lips were blue. There was a bottle nearby. The room smelled terrible, like bitter almonds. Edna Woolworth Hutton was dead at 33 years old. The official cause of death was listed as apoplexy and nephritis, basically a stroke and kidney failure. But everyone knew the truth. Edna had poisoned herself. She'd swallowed mercuric chloride. Whether she meant to kill herself or whether it was an accident, nobody knows for sure. But here's what we do know. Barbara's father, Franklin Hutton, was having an affair. A very public affair with a woman named Irene Curly Bod. Everyone in New York society knew about it. And Edna knew that Franklin didn't love her. He'd married her for the Woolworth fortune. And meanwhile, Edna was having her own affair with a man named Bud Bouvier, cousin to Jackie Kennedy's father. It was a mess. A toxic, wealthy mess. And 5-year-old Barbara was caught in the middle of it. The image of her mother's dead body, Barbara never got over it. She had nightmares about it for the rest of her life. 60 years later, she was still writing about it, still seeing it when she closed her eyes. After Edna died, Barbara's life became chaos. Her father didn't want to deal with her. He shipped her off to relatives, first to her grandparents at their 60-room mansion on Long Island. Her grandfather Frank, he was the only one who seemed to actually love her. He called her my princess. He bought her elaborate dollhouses. He took her on carriage rides. But Frank Woolworth was struggling with the same depression that had killed his daughter. And on April 8th, 1919, he died too. Barbara was 7 years old, and she'd now lost the two people who'd shown her any real affection. Her grandmother was losing her mind to dementia. She barely recognized Barbara. So the little girl got passed around to different aunts and uncles like an unwanted package. Nobody really wanted her. They wanted her money, sure. But her? She was just a reminder of a tragedy. Then her father did something that Barbara never forgave. He married Irene Bod, the woman he'd been cheating with while Edna was alive. And he expected Barbara to call this woman Mother. Irene hated Barbara, or at least she saw her as an obstacle to Franklin's fortune. She was cold to her, dismissive. Barbara spent most of her childhood being raised by governesses and nannies, not by family. So what did Barbara learn from all this? She learned that her mother had killed herself because her father didn't love her. She learned that money couldn't buy love or safety. She learned that everyone around her wanted something from her, her inheritance, but nobody wanted her. She learned that the people who were supposed to protect her would abandon her. And she learned that if you wanted people to stay, you had to pay them. give them gifts, buy their affection. Because love, real love, wasn't something she deserved. These lessons, the ones a traumatized child teaches herself to survive, they would destroy her adult life. Every relationship, every marriage, every friendship. Barbara would spend millions of dollars trying to buy the love her mother's death had stolen from her. And it would never, ever work. By 1933, Barbara Hutton wasn't just rich, she was famous. Movie star famous, royalty famous. Everyone in America knew her name. At 21 years old, she'd just gotten full control of her inheritance. $50 million, plus all the properties, plus all the jewelry. And she started living like it. She threw parties that cost $500,000, just for one night. She'd fly in orchids from South America. She'd hire 3 different orchestras. She'd serve champagne that cost more per bottle than most Americans made in a month. Remember, this was during the Great Depression. People were starving. And Barbara Hutton was serving caviar on ice sculptures shaped like swans. Meant the press covered her every move. What she wore, who she danced with, what she ate for breakfast. There was a movie made about her in 1936 called Poor Little Rich Girl, starring Shirley Temple. There was a hit song with the same title. Barbara Hutton had become a symbol of wealth, of excess, of everything America both wanted and resented. She had homes everywhere. The London mansion, Winfield House, cost her $4 million to buy and another $2 million to renovate. She put gold fixtures in every bathroom. She built a ballroom that could fit 500 people. In Paris, she had an apartment with 18th century tapestries on the walls and a private chef who used to cook for the Rothschilds. Then there was the Tangier Palace, Sidi Hosni, a Moorish fantasy with courtyards and fountains and hundreds of antiques. She bought it fully furnished from a bankrupt aristocrat and barely changed a thing. And Sumia, the Japanese palace in Mexico. She paid $1.7 million for a traditional Japanese building, had it taken apart piece by piece, shipped across the Pacific Ocean, and rebuilt in Cuernavaca. It had 17 separate buildings, gardens designed by masters from Kyoto, a tea ceremony house where the utensils alone cost $300,000. She visited it maybe 10 times in her entire life. Her jewelry collection was insane. The Marie Antoinette pearls, $850,000. The Pasha diamond, 37 carats. The Romanov emeralds. A tiara that belonged to a Russian Grand Duchess, $2.1 million. Cartier and Van Cleef and Arpels managed her collection because it was too valuable for regular jewelers. She was friends with everyone. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Cole Porter, Cecil Beaton, Ernest Hemingway, Gary Cooper, Dorothy Parker. If you were famous in the 1930s and 40s, you'd probably been to one of Barbara's parties. Her wardrobe was exclusively haute couture, Balenciaga, Chanel, Givenchy. She kept separate wardrobes in each of her homes, so she'd never wear the same outfit in the same city twice. The public was obsessed with her. Shop girls copied her hairstyle. Cosmetics companies tried to match her lipstick shade. When she bought a certain style of shoe, it would sell out across America within weeks. But here's what people didn't see. Barbara was miserable. She threw these massive parties and then hid in her bedroom before they were over. She bought friendship with expensive gifts because she didn't trust that anyone liked her for herself. She was constantly anxious. I constantly worried that people were using her. And she was right to worry, because they were. But this glittering facade, the parties, the jewels, the mansions, it was about to come crashing down. Because Barbara was about to make the first in a series of catastrophic decisions that would drain her fortune and break her heart over and over again. She was about to get married. Barbara Hutton married 7 times. Every single marriage was a disaster, and together they cost her everything. Husband 1, Prince Alexis Mdivani, 1933 to 1935. Barbara met Alexis at a party in Paris in 1932. She was 20 years old. He was handsome, charming, and he called himself a Georgian prince. He quoted poetry. He took her on moonlight gondola rides. He told her he loved her for herself, not her money. But every single word was a lie. Alexis Mudivani was the most famous fortune hunter in Europe. His whole family was in on it. They called them the marrying Mumdivanis. His brothers had married American heiresses. His sister had married a Spanish count. They treated marriage like a business, and business was good. Everyone warned Barbara. Her cousin Jimmy told her explicitly, "He's only after your money." Her friends said the same thing, but Barbara didn't want to hear it. She was desperate to be loved, desperate to believe that someone saw past the fortune to the real her. They got married in Paris on May 20th, 1933. The wedding cost $500,000. That's nearly $12 million today.
Worldwide interest is taken in the marriage of Miss Barbara Hutton, reputed to be the world's wealthiest heiress, to Prince Alexis Medivani, a member of an ancient family from Georgia, now part of Russia. This is the wedding by Russian rites, a civil wedding having taken place earlier in the week.
600 guests, a 12-tier cake, champagne flowing like water. For a wedding present, Barbara gave Alexis a check for $1 million. Then she bought him a polo stable for $750,000, then a mansion in London. Then she set up an annual allowance of $1.5 million per year. The marriage lasted 20 months. Alexis didn't even try to hide what he was doing. He openly had mistresses. He spent her money on sports cars and clothes and polo ponies. When Barbara complained, he got mean, verbally abusive. When they divorced in March 1935,
names in the news 25 years ago included the 5 and 10 heiress, Princess Barbara Hutton Medivani, flying across the continent to Reno to divorce her polo-playing prince. As she landed in the divorce capital, speculation already mounted as to whom her next would be.
Alexis walked away with about $2 million in cash, plus all the properties. He'd made roughly $100,000 per month of marriage. Not bad for a fake prince. Husband 2. Count Court Reventlow, 1935 to 1941. You'd think Barbara would learn. You'd think after Medivani, she'd be more careful. But 2 months after her divorce was final, she married again. Count Court Heinrich von Haugwitz-Hardenberg Reventlow. Try saying that 3 times fast. He was a Danish nobleman with a title as long as his list of debts. They married on May 14th, 1935 in Reno, Nevada. Barbara was in such a hurry she didn't even change out of her travelling clothes.
As you will have recognised is Barbara Hutton, I beg her pardon, the Countess Reventlow, whose kidnapping case against her husband was recent front-page news in London. She's been photographed too often to be camera-shy, but our cameraman at least doesn't seem to be popular.
Court was smarter than Alexis, more subtle. He convinced Barbara that they needed a mansion in London, $350,000. Then it needed renovations, another $500,000. Then they needed a country estate for hunting, then a yacht, then a staff of 40 servants. His allowance started at $1 million per year and kept growing. In 1936, Barbara had a baby, Lance. For a brief moment, she thought she'd finally found the family she wanted. But Court used the baby as a weapon. He controlled every decision about Lance's upbringing. He threatened custody battles whenever Barbara questioned his spending. They divorced in 1941 after 6 years. Court got $1.5 million plus $75,000 per year for Lance's upbringing, most of which he spent on himself while nannies raised the kid. Husband 3, Cary Grant, 1942 to 1945. In February 1942, Barbara married the movie star Cary Grant. Finally, people thought, she'd married someone who didn't need her money. Grant was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He was independently wealthy. He even insisted on a prenup, saying he wouldn't take anything if they divorced. But this marriage failed too. Grant was consumed by his career. Barbara felt like an accessory to his fame rather than a partner. The press called them Cash and Cary, a nickname that hurt Barbara deeply. They divorced in 1945 after 3 years. Grant kept his word. He took nothing in the divorce. But Barbara had still spent millions maintaining homes in LA, New York, and London to accommodate his filming schedule. Husband number 4, Prince Igor Trubetskoy, 1947 to 1951, a Russian prince who drank heavily and cared more about her wine cellar than her. 4 years. Cost, about $1 million in settlements. Husband 5, Porfirio Rubirosa, 1953. This is where it gets really bad. Rubirosa was a Dominican diplomat and legendary playboy. He'd been married to Doris Duke, another heiress, before Barbara. He was famous for being able to separate rich women from their money. The marriage lasted 53 days. In that time, Barbara bought him a coffee plantation in the Dominican Republic, several sports cars, and a B-25 bomber, an actual World War II bomber plane, because he mentioned he'd like to own one. Total cost, $2.5 million for 53 days of marriage. That's over $47,000 per day. To husband 6, Baron Gottfried von Kram, 1955 to 1959. Von Kram was a German tennis champion. He was also gay, publicly gay. He'd been imprisoned by the Nazis for it. Barbara knew this going in. She thought maybe a companionate marriage, where both people knew the score, might work better than romantic passion. It didn't. She ended up funding his lifestyle and his male lovers while feeling lonelier than ever. 4 years. $500,000 in settlements.
Seen at a Paris hotel after her wedding, millionairess Barbara Hutton with her 6th husband, Baron von Kram, the former tennis star. The marriage had taken place at the Versailles Town Hall, the date having been kept something of a secret. It's reported that they will have their honeymoon in Mexico and then plan to settle down in the French capital.
Husband 7, Prince Pierre d'Onvin, 1964 to 1966. The final humiliation. Pierre was supposedly a prince of Laos, though that title was questionable at best. He was 30 years younger than Barbara. By this point, she was 52, visibly ill, addicted to pills, and barely functional. Pierre was essentially a paid companion to a handsome young man willing to pretend to be her husband in exchange for money. It ended in 1966 after 2 years of mutual pretense. By the late 1960s, Barbara had paid out at least $20 to $25 million in direct divorce settlements. That's roughly $200 million in today's money. But that's not counting all the properties she bought them, the cars, the business investments, the monthly allowances, the incidental expenses. When you add it all up, her marriages probably cost her $40 to $50 million total. But the real cost wasn't financial, it was psychological. Each failed marriage confirmed her deepest fear, that she was unlovable, that her only value was her checkbook, that real love, the kind her mother never got, the kind she'd been searching for since she was 5 years old, didn't exist. Not for her. And so she did what she'd always done. She tried to numb the pain, with pills, with alcohol, with more spending, with anything that would make her forget, even for a moment, that she was alone. And that's when everything started to fall apart. By 1970, the math was simple and brutal. Barbara was spending about $3 million per year. Her investments were generating maybe a tenth of that. The fortune that had seemed infinite was running out. The spending was out of control. She couldn't say no to anyone. A maid brought her tea with a smile. $10,000 tip. A doctor made a house call. $25,000 gift. She kept dozens of people on permanent allowances. Old servants, distant cousins, random people who'd once been nice to her. She was basically running a charity for anyone who paid her the slightest bit of attention. And then there were the properties. Each mansion cost hundreds of thousands per year just to maintain. Staff, repairs, property taxes, insurance. Winfield House in London, $500,000 per year to maintain. She visited maybe once a year. The Tangier Palace, same thing. The Mexican estate required 35 full-time employees just to keep it from falling apart. She hadn't been there in 5 years, but she couldn't sell them. These properties were the only stable things in her life, even if they were bankrupting her. And then there were the pills. Barbara's drug addiction had started small in the 1940s. Anxiety medication, sleeping pills, normal stuff that doctors prescribed. But by the 1960s, she was taking massive amounts of barbiturates every single day. Seconal, Tunal, whatever she could get. She mixed them with alcohol. She'd take pills to sleep, pills to wake up, pills to deal with people, pills to avoid people. She had doctors who would prescribe whatever she wanted, as long as she paid them enough. And her staff was too scared to say no. They needed their jobs. She overdosed multiple times, rushed to hospitals, stomach pumped, doctors lecturing her, and then she'd go right back to it. Her physical health collapsed. She developed severe anorexia. At her worst, she weighed 80 pounds. 80 pounds on a 5'4" frame. You could see her bones through her skin. She wasn't eating because food had become another form of control. It was something she could control when everything else was chaos. In 1969, she fell and broke her hip. It never healed properly. She was in constant pain, which meant more painkillers, which made everything worse. By 1970, when she was nearly blind, cataracts that she refused to treat, vision problems from years of drug abuse, she started living in dark rooms because she couldn't handle bright light anymore. And then came July 22nd, 1972. Her son Lance, her only child, was killed in a plane crash. He was piloting a small Cessna through the Rocky Mountains when it went down in a storm. He was 36 years old. Lance had spent his whole life trying to escape being Barbara Hutton's son. He'd rebelled through dangerous hobbies, race car driving, flying small planes. He'd kept his mother at a distance, but he was still her son, her only child. When Barbara got the news, witnesses said she let out a scream that echoed through the entire floor of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, a sound of pure animal grief. She didn't attend his funeral. Her doctors said she was too fragile to travel. Instead, she stayed in her hotel room and increased her pills until she was barely conscious. After Lance died, Barbara just gave up. She started selling everything. The properties went for a fraction of what they were worth. She needed cash fast, and buyers knew it. Winfield House was sold to the US government for almost nothing. It's now the official residence of the American ambassador to Britain. The jewellery went next. Sold at auction or pawned for terrible prices. The Marie Antoinette pearls that she'd bought for $850,000. Sold for $175,000. The Russian tiara went for 1/10 of its value. By 1975, her fortune was down to about $3 million. Still a lot of money by normal standards, but it was shrinking every day. Medical bills, hotel bills, the few staff members she had left. She moved into a modest suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. She couldn't afford private homes anymore. Her world shrank to a few rooms where the curtains stayed closed all the time. She spent most of her time in bed. She weighed about 75 pounds by 1978. She barely ate. She barely talked. When she did talk, it was often to people who weren't there. Her mother, Lance, her grandfather, Frank. Her old friends were gone. Turns out when you run out of money, you find out who your real friends were. And Barbara had none. In the end, the poor little rich girl who'd once commanded the attention of the entire world was completely alone, waiting to die in a dark hotel room, surrounded by nurses she paid to tolerate her. The maid found her on the morning of May 11th, 1979. Barbara Hutton was lying in bed in her suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. She died sometime during the night. Heart attack. She was 66 years old, but looked 90. She weighed 75 pounds. When they went through her possessions, they found $3,500 in her bank account. In today's money, that's about $15,000. That was it. The woman who'd once been worth nearly $1 billion died with less money than most people have in their retirement savings. Her remaining possessions, some clothes, photographs, a few books, were worth maybe $10,000 total. The jewellery was gone. The properties were gone. Even her furniture had been sold off to pay bills. They buried her on May 15th, 1979 at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. She was placed in the Woolworth family mausoleum next to her mother Edna and her grandfather Frank. The funeral was small, and a handful of distant relatives, 2 or 3 loyal servants, some random people who'd read about her death in the papers. None of her 7 ex-husbands showed up. The European aristocrats who'd filled her parties, nowhere to be seen. The Hollywood celebrities who'd drunk her champagne, not there. The friends who'd accepted her generosity for decades, too busy. The newspapers ran stories with headlines like, "Poor little rich girl dies penniless," and "Woolworth Heiress, riches to rags." Everyone had an opinion about what her life meant. Some people said it proved money couldn't buy happiness. Others said she'd wasted every advantage. Some felt sorry for her. Others thought she got what she deserved. But here's what they found in her hotel room: an unfinished autobiography, written in shaky handwriting on hotel stationery. And she'd been trying to tell her own story before she died. One passage said, "I wanted to be loved for myself, not for what I could give. In the end, I was loved for neither. My greatest fear was always to die alone. I suppose we all get what we fear most." That's how Barbara Hutton's story ends. Not in a palace, not surrounded by loved ones, but in a rented hotel room, alone, broke, with nothing to show for 66 years of life, except a cautionary tale about what wealth can't do. She'd proven that you can inherit $1 billion and still end up with nothing, that you can own mansions and still have no home, that you can buy anything except the one thing you actually need. The poor little rich girl died poor, and little, and alone. So what do we make of Barbara Hutton's life? Was she a victim of her wealth? Absolutely. From the moment she was born, people saw her as a resource to exploit, not a person to love. But was she also responsible for her own choices? Also, yes. She married 7 obvious fortune hunters. She couldn't say no to people who were clearly using her. She spent compulsively even as her money ran out. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. She was a traumatized child who never recovered from finding her mother's body, who never learned what healthy love looked like, who spent her entire life trying to buy the affection that had been stolen from her at age 5. And in the end, she learned what her grandfather had somehow understood when he built his empire on nickels and dimes: that real value isn't measured in dollars, that all the money in the world is worthless if you're alone. Here's my question for you. Could Barbara's story have ended differently? If she'd made different choices, could she have found happiness? Or was her fate sealed the moment her mother died? And what does her story tell us about wealth today? We live in a time when billionaires are everywhere, when we celebrate extreme wealth. Barbara Hutton's life is a reminder that money solves some problems but creates others. That extreme wealth can actually make it harder to find genuine human connection. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was Barbara Hutton a tragic figure who deserves sympathy, or someone who wasted every advantage she was given? If you want to hear more stories like this, about people who had everything and lost it all. Hit subscribe. We've got videos about Howard Hughes, Doris Duke, and other people whose fortunes couldn't save them from themselves. Thanks for watching. And remember, the richest person isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who needs the least